Welcome to BookHuddle. I'm your host, Karen Reeder. Today we are joined by Laura Stegman. I am so excited to have her on today. We are going to be talking about how our worth is so much more than our mistakes, that we matter more than our mistakes. We're talking about her Summer of Luck trilogy that just came to an end. So that is so exciting. The third book came out this year. First, I want to just let Laura take a second to introduce yourself. Tell us a little bit about you other than a writer, Laura.
Well, hi everyone, and thank you, Karen, so much for having me. I'm so excited about having this conversation and talking to you about my books and all the focus that people like you and me have on middle grade books, and not just middle grade, but books for kids in general. I am a children's book writer. Sort of later in my life, I spent more years than not as a publicist, and I had arts clients and all kinds of interesting work that I did for many, many years. And now I'm my own publicist. So it's been very nice to make that transition. I also, as part of my writing work, I've developed a PR tips for authors course, and I work on that. I do visits to schools and libraries, and I'm going to and book festivals, and I've been a panelist at a number of events talking about connecting with other writers. And yeah, and I am working on a fourth book, which isn't, of course, part of the series. It's a contemporary middle grade book about a girl that's very much like my own experience. So no fantasy in that book.
That is so neat. I love hearing that you were on the other side of the writing, being a publicist.
What's so interesting is that there are so many middle grade authors that are marketing specialists or teachers or librarians,
Yes,
people.
I see the
It's
teachers for sure.
Yeah, it's very inspiring to see that people who have a career love writing so much that they've added a second career. And
That,
that's my experience too. So
oh, well, that's so cool to hear about. All right, so Laura, give us the elevator pitch. We're going to do a long elevator because I want to hear about the first book in the trilogy.
Summer of Luck, all things are possible.
All things are possible. Yes, because that's what I wanted to get to our theme. Okay. All right, tell us all about.
Okay, so Summer of Luck is about three struggling kids overall who find their way to self-acceptance with the help of Leroy Usher, Carnival King, which is the L.U.C.K, who is a ghost who haunts a magical carnival. And it takes place, all three books take place at a summer camp. And the kids are struggling. What they're struggling with is their ability to communicate. Darby stutters, and Naz, who is just moved to this country, the United States, from Morocco, he speaks Arabic and French, but he's just learning English. And Justin, whose father passed away right before the story starts, is in his grief is just really shut down and isn't talking at all. When they come to camp, they hear this magical calliope music, and when they hear that, all of a sudden they can hear each other's thoughts, and that begins the story that takes us into the world of their summer camp and into the magical carnival where they meet Leroy Usher, the ghost.
Oh, I love this so much because I've seen picture books about nonverbal children or just, that these representations are out there and maybe them discovering their voice or just, appreciating them regardless of them having a verbal voice. But I love that we have this middle grade book and we have three different reasons that they are currently not verbal and are struggling to express themselves. And so I was just so excited about this. And I want to just stop before we get on to the synopsis of the other two books and just say I only read book three. And it was really well done that I could go in and read this because sometimes this is a struggle that, and I've talked to authors about this, that sometimes it feels awkward when you're reading it, that it's like, okay, you're trying to give some backstory, but you're making it awkward here. Or sometimes they just don't weave it together very well. And Laura, you did just such an excellent job that I could enjoy it, and it gave me what I needed to understand what had been going on previously. And you did great. So I wanted to
Thank
point that
you.
out for anybody. But that said, don't skip the other two. I skipped because I had this interview coming up, but don't skip the other two because I was just like, this is so fantastic. I can't wait to go back and read the other two. So just everybody else listening, just go read them in order.
Well, and also, the thing about All Things Are Possible is that I went into writing a, a children's book because I had never written a book
Right.
before, much less a children's book, but with the idea that my own experience as a reader at the middle grade age helped me find out that I wasn't the only one who struggled with X, Y, or Z. And I wanted to write a book that kids today would feel the same way about finding that they're not alone that
Yes.
I found when I was a kid. So that was sort of my motivation in writing this series, and each book sort of follows that same kind of idea.
I love it. I love that kids can see themselves because so often I think we as people, even especially kids, but we assume we're the only one going through that, and no, nobody else could be. But these three find themselves in this connection of not speaking. So
Yeah,
it's
yeah.
wonderful. All right, so
So should we move on
yes,
to
let's
Ready
do the
or Not?
second book. Yes, ready or not.
Okay. Ready or Not. Um, this book is a year later, takes place a year after the first book. So I didn't mention that in the first book, the kids are Naz is 10, Darby's 11, and Justin's 12. Now they're each a year older. And Ready or Not focuses on Justin, who comes to summer camp having had an experience with a bully and doing the right thing by talking to an adult, but sort of finding out that not everybody life isn't fair is
Yes.
sort of the gist of it. And the bully slugged him, and he's still pretty traumatized from that. And when he gets to camp, he finds he faces a tricky real life choice when he meets another kid in his cabin who is a bigoted bully. And so his choice is stand up to bigotry or let fear hold him back. That's the overall arching theme of the book of Ready or Not. And the kids come back to camp with every expectation that they're going to see Mr. Usher again and have more magical adventures with him. And there are more magical adventures, but they're not what they expect.
Right.
And they find themselves taken on some time travel. The first one is back to 1910, where, okay, now we're going to see Mr. Usher, and they do. But in 1910, Mr. Usher is 7 years old, so he's not quite Mr. Usher. And but in each visit to the past, as they watch what happens in Mr. Usher's life and the racism and bigotry that he himself experienced and how he dealt with it, Justin learns how to. Mr. Usher doesn't tell him what to do, but
Right.
Justin realizes there are ways to deal with things that he really didn't know at the beginning of the book. And that life is unfair, and that
Right.
more often than not, one cannot um, change someone else
Right.
or solve a problem. But there are things that we can do, and again, without giving away the ending of the
Right.
book, the theme of that book is really, to just embrace goodness and that this Ready or Not is very timely, actually.
Yes, absolutely. So I think I'm going to stop right here and just say that you do such a good job about this. And this is one thing that I talked about with a picture book author that we were talking about how kids don't want a didactic book. They don't want. And so he's like, how could I have written a more didactic book than How to Apologize, right? And so, anyways, he uses humor and stuff like that. So how do you do that, Laura? Did you have the idea of the fantasy and then the lessons just came naturally? Or did you have the idea of you wanted them to learn these things about growth and, overcoming these obstacles, and then you found the fantasy? How did
I
it?
always knew I wanted it to be a fantasy. I knew that I wanted there to be, all three books are based in the in a contemporary setting. Actually, they're not set in the present. They're set
Right.
in the early 2000s.
Yes. I know.
Um, but other than that, they could be anywhere, any
Yeah.
time. And but I did want there to be magic in the book because one of my favorite books from when I was a kid had a magic to it,
Yes.
and I felt like it was a way of bringing in a sense of a sense of possibility, a
Yeah.
sense of all things are possible, where one uses in real life one uses their imagination, or kids use their imagination, and can use magical creatures to help them. I mean, everything from Harry Potter,
Yes.
on back. So that really appealed to me.
All right. So the chambered nautilus now. So go ahead and give us a little synopsis about that.
Okay. This chambered nautilus, when my publisher and I were working on, when they were working on the cover, we weren't sure what the subheading was going to be. How we came up with, can the power of friendship save the day, which I love because you know I hadn't really thought about how this whole series is woven with the power of friendship.
Yes.
So and interestingly, the book starts again the next year. They're 12, 13, and 14,
Yeah.
which is getting older.
Yes.
And
And questioning,
and
are our friendships able to survive where we're changing during the school year, right?
exactly. So they come to camp. Justin is now a CIT, a counselor in training, and he's very busy with that. And he's you know they also, let me preface this by saying that at the end of Ready or Not, they believe Mr. Usher has gone to rest, back to rest,
Hmm.
and they don't expect to see him at
Bad.
all.
Hmm.
And they have also lost their with that, they have lost their power to hear each other's thoughts.
Okay.
So anyway, Justin's a CIT, and Naz is very excited because his cabin mates and he are building a robot. And Darby has come to camp with three other friends, close friends from school.
Right.
She's not really interested in the boys, like
Right.
her
But she's
old
had
friends.
9 months during the school year now that she's
Yeah.
made other connections.
Yes, exactly. And this is big for Darby because Darby started the series where she really didn't have friends because she was so kind of
With her stutter
uh
and
yeah.
lack of confidence.
Yes, exactly. And Mr. Usher taught them how to find their voices. So they've been able to, broaden their lives in as before they come back to camp. But as far as they had a plan, and their plan was to bring walkie-talkies to talk to each other because that was how they're gonna
Right. It's
communicate. Since they
2001. They're not all equipped with cell phones in their pocket like they are now.
No, exactly. And that's, it's funny. I did begin writing Summer of Luck back in 2000, but I really, I continue to want it to be set there because I didn't want there to be modern technology.
Right.
And only at the end of the Chambered Nautilus is there even a reference to modern
Right.
technology.
Right.
So anyway, so when they come back to camp for the third year, the Mr. Usher's carnival has been transformed into a real life carnival that the kids at their camp use. And they've added a new attraction. It's called the chambered nautilus, which is based on the anatomy of the spiral sea creature that has little compartments that it grows in from one life stage to the next. You can kind of see a
Yes,
spiral in the
in the
back
back,
there.
yes.
And you know, at the very beginning of the story, the Ferris wheel in the carnival goes awry, and one of the pods on the Ferris wheel just disappears. And so the carnival gets shut down. And, as I say, the kids are, uh, notice or, they hear about that. But they're, again, like Darby and her cabin mates are having a midnight party.
Yeah,
And Naz and Justin are in the carnival when this episode with the Ferris wheel appears,
right.
but they they appeal to her, hey, let's what happened? We maybe Mr. Usher wants to see us or whatever, and she's
Mhm.
like, no, 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 no. But it turns out that her walkie-talkie starts making noise during this girl party in her cabin. She turns it off and it's still making noise. She takes the batteries out. She runs out. It's still making noise, and it turns out it's a desperate plea from Mr. Usher for help.
Right,
And at first she's like, "Oh, no, I can't. I don't want."
right,
She's with these friends from school who are in her journalism club,
right.
and she doesn't want anybody to know that she knew a
Hung out with a
ghost.
ghost,
Exactly.
right?
So that's the beginning of the story, and these kids have to make a decision. He's Mr. Usher was always there for them. Are they going to be able to be there for him? Is the question that the story starts with.
Right. So I love this. I love this need for friendship that, this friendship got them through at the beginning, but then they're wondering, are we going back to that? Can I have my old friends with my new friends? Or, what am I doing with these friendships? And so let's actually get into this theme that I wanted to talk about. So you matter more than your mistakes, because we've all made mistakes. And so as this comes together, that I feel like this is an overarching theme throughout the book, the series, right? Even though I haven't read the other two, I felt like this could sum it up. That all things are possible. You are worth more than mistakes or weaknesses, if we could replace mistakes with weaknesses. So,
Absolutely.
how and why did that come together, that this with magic? When did you realize that as you were writing? That
The first book took me forever to write and to
right,
to be to polish and rewrite and blah 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 because it was my first book. The second book I had a contract by then for 3 books, so
right,
I had a very clear idea of what I wanted that book to be about. And when I got to the third book, I was like, what am I going to write about? I knew I wanted to conclude the series, and I
right,
wanted to have the story conclude where you see the kids going on their in their own direction, but recognizing the power of their friendship that could last, whether they see each other or not. Like friends that a lot of us have, where you don't see a friend for years and then
yeah,
you get together and it was like you never have been apart. And that's the kind of friendship I always saw that these 3 kids had. And that's what I wanted to portray, that whatever happens, a friendship will survive. So I didn't know, like I said, I didn't know what to write about.
right, right,
And I had sort of set it up, even though I didn't know where this was going. But in the end of Ready or Not, as I said, they lost their power to communicate, and it wasn't it turns out it wasn't as a result of Mr. Usher's intention.
mm,
It was Mr. Usher made a mistake,
right,
and he hung around too long. He didn't he had the opportunity to go back to rest, but
Right.
he didn't take it. And that's what, in the story of the Chambered Nautilus, his son finds his Mr. Usher built he built carnival rides and
Right.
attractions. That was his profession. That's why he's called Carnival King.
Yes.
And he had designed all these rides and attractions only for the magical world, not for the
Right.
real world.
Right.
But his son found the plans for this attraction called the Chambered Nautilus, and the son didn't know it wasn't supposed to be a real ride.
Right.
And Mr. Usher wanted to hang around like many parents do,
Yes.
put their hand in and prevent his son from making a mistake.
Right.
Well, didn't work out like that, because the new Chambered Nautilus ride or attraction, it's not quite right, and it affects all the other rides in the carnival, and that's why I
Mm.
said the piece of the Ferris wheel disappears.
Right.
I'm sort of jumping around, but the reason that I said I didn't know what this book was going to be
Yeah.
about,
Right.
but I was looking back in Summer of Luck, for just desperate for some ideas.
Right.
What did I have in
Here.
here that I could
Yes.
I could conclude the story with? Well, it turns out in Summer of Luck, we are introduced to this magical carnival ride that is called Timeless Voyages, and it has
Right.
7 rooms, and each room has a different name. And 3 of the rooms are used in Summer of Luck. But the other 4, one of them's called the Chambered Nautilus. That wasn't used. I mean, it's in
It's
there, but
just
it wasn't.
referenced. Okay.
Yes. And the Chambered Nautilus came from a book that I loved when I was a kid called The Diamond in the Window,
Okay.
where there was an adventure, the fantasy adventure these kids took, and they got stuck in a Chambered Nautilus, and they had to answer questions to get out.
Right.
And I loved that book, and I loved that chapter. And I thought, okay, I'm going to create in this third book a Chambered Nautilus ride, because I I was so fascinated by the anatomy of these sea creatures, where,
Right.
as I said, they're born in one of the compartments, and as they grow, the shell gets bigger and bigger and bigger. And
Oh,
there's just so many fascinating things about Chambered Nautiluses. And I decided, this whole story idea just kind of came to me about how Mr. Usher was still there and he was stuck, and he needed their help to get back to the portal, which was in his office
right.
portrait, to get back to rest with his
Right.
wife. And during the first 2 books, these kids have these magical adventures where they sneak away from camp.
Right.
No one ever catches them. They come and go. It's part of the fantasy.
Yes.
And
Because
but
they're the only ones in that fantasy world. Not everybody
yes,
knows. There's not a larger group, right, that knows about this fantasy
exactly. It's
world.
just the 3 of them.
Right.
And they help Mr. Usher, um, with reuniting his adult children in the first book.
Right.
And but the very first time they sneak away in the Chambered Nautilus and try to help Mr. Usher, there are guards on this carnival now.
Yes.
It's a lot more real life. So they are caught, and they are given strict instructions to their accounts by the owner of the camp. You cannot do this. You can't. This is dangerous. You can't do
Right.
this. You can't
Right.
sneak away. So they have to figure out how to help Mr. Usher, and without doing anything wrong.
Right.
Without sneaking away.
So it almost
And
feels lighter fantasy in this third book. Like that sounds like it was heavier fantasy in the first 2. And then
yes,
one
definitely.
is
I mean, the
becoming
magic,
more real
the
life.
magical, yeah, there's no, the magical, there aren't magical adventures, actually, come to think of it,
Right.
in the
The
third book.
magical thing is that missing Ferris wheel and then interacting with a ghost.
Yes, exactly. That is still fantasy. But and the reason Mr. Usher needs their help is because he made this mistake. But once he recognizes that he's put these kids in danger with their camp,
Right.
he doesn't want to put them in any further danger.
Right.
He's embarrassed. He's upset with himself. How could I have made this mistake to begin with?
Right.
Just go away. I don't, I'll have to figure
I'm an
this
adult. I
out.
don't need children to save me.
So that is I can't even tell you how I thought of that. But that's part of the magic of writing,
Right.
like
It's just
just
developed.
coming up with things that you have a blank page and all of a sudden you have a whole book, you
That's
know?
amazing. That's amazing. So I love this. I love that sometimes we get caught in our own chambered nautilus that like the kids each had that. We could say that Darby had her own chambered nautilus, Justin had his own, that they could not progress until they recognized that they mattered more than the mistake. Then they could go farther in their growth. And Mr. Escher helped them see that, and it comes full circle to be able to notice. And so I think this is a thing that does hold so many people back. We see our weaknesses, we see our shortcomings or a mistake that we've made, and it inhibits our growth. But realizing, and I think this is a big thing that, and you mentioned this also with the second book, that belief is so important because it's one thing to be like, okay, yeah, we've got strengths and say it ourselves or to have somebody else say it, but until we believe that, there's a lack of growth because
Right. Right.
without belief, how can you grow?
Well, and even Mr. Usher, the without giving away the ending of the Chambered Nautilus, but indeed the kids uh they have to convince him.
Right,
What frees him is that these kids tell him how much he's meant to them,
right,
and that mistake or not, they don't care about the mistake. They don't care that he made a mistake. They care that he helped them and they love him and they want him to go back to rest with his wife.
right,
So yeah, and he doesn't believe them at first, but as as the story goes on, he learns to believe them, and they get to be
right.
there for him.
Right. And that is it's so neat to have this come full circle because like Darby probably felt so inhibited by her stutter, right? Because I it comes back a little bit that every now and then she stutters a little bit in book three. So is that completely inhibiting her, but until her belief in herself comes, she's not able to have confidence, right? So a belief in
Yeah, well,
herself, right.
I'm sorry,
Go, go.
her stutter doesn't go away, and she just learns to accept that she has it and she's okay with it, and it
Right.
doesn't inhibit her the way it did when she first came to camp. And that's thanks to Mr. Usher. And
Right.
that's one of the things she tells him, you may have made a mistake, but you changed my life,
Right, right.
essentially.
Well, and doesn't she, so with speech, maybe you don't, the stutter doesn't go away, but you realize when it's most relevant because it's when she's stressed that it comes more, right? And so
Exactly. Yeah.
it's more getting a handle on it, not making it go
Right.
completely, but getting a handle. So, because isn't that the case with so many weaknesses? Well, you're not trying to make this mistake or weakness go away. You're learning to be confident and operate through it. Is that
Exactly.
where we're going? And so otherwise we're stuck. We're stuck in our chambered nautilus. So because as the chambered nautilus grows, that initial piece is still there, right? Am I understanding the
Well, it goes from chamber to chamber.
Okay.
The no, and
Oh,
it
so that
doesn't
one,
stay there.
it's like different rooms.
Yeah, once the Nautilus
But
grows
it's
big enough to
carrying
go in the
that
next
previous
room.
room in its shell. Is it like a shell?
Yeah,
It's carrying that.
the shell stays, but it's closed off.
Okay, so could you
And
say it's still a part of the creature without it living
yes,
there?
absolutely.
That
That's a
everything?
really good
Okay.
point. Yeah,
It's a part of me. The mistake or the weakness is a part of me. It's there. I've grown from it, but I'm not experiencing it anymore.
right. And now the creature, by the time the creature becomes big and sticks out of the front of it,
Right.
and that's how it's. But the chambers still serve a purpose because there's a siphon that connects them, it's how the creature uses jet propulsion to move through the water. So
Right.
there's nothing wasted, and that's a really good analogy too
Yes.
for the, for Darby stutter. Her stutter is a note that, okay, I need to slow down. I need to stop and connect with myself instead of losing my words.
Yes, that nothing about our experience need be wasted. Like we might regret or dislike a weakness or regret a mistake, but it need not be a waste. But there's no.
Exactly.
Okay, I love it. I love it. I love, and I bet we could sit here, Laura, and just keep finding things all day from book one, two, and three that we could be like, and there you could grow, and there you could find this theme. I bet we could find sub themes or because I love that when I was a student in high school and honors English, there was a theme that the teacher was looking for, but I loved when she said, you know what, there's really not a set right answer because there are so many themes. And so I love that when we read a book, we take it and it becomes ours and we develop these connections and these themes. And of course, it's your story, you've written it, but the connections that we build are our own as we read books. And so
Absolutely.
I,
Beautifully put.
yes. So since we can't talk all day, I'd love to, but since we can't join, I'll end with my final question that I love to ask authors. What is another favorite children's book that you've had that you would like to share with our audience?
I am very excited to answer this question because I read a lot of middle grade books. I've just started a new one. It's called The Bletchley Riddle. That's not the
Oh,
one
I
I'm
just
going to
finished
learn.
that. Yes.
Oh, yeah, love it, love it. Um, the book that I read very recently that will stay with me a really long time is called The Color of Sound by
Okay.
Emily Barth Eisler.
So I've heard of
And
it, but I have not read that one. So I'm excited for you to tell us about it.
it's got a touch of fantasy in it too, because it's about a 12-year-old who um, travels back to the eastern part of the country on the eve of the passing of her grandmother.
Right.
And her mother, and she's an accomplished violin player,
Yes.
and she's somewhat reluctantly an accomplished violin player, driven very strongly by her mother's desires. And when she goes back to this house where her mother grew up, and they spend some time there that summer, she meets a mysterious girl in a shed that is part of the house, the family
Right.
house. And it turns out, it's not revealing anything to say this,
Okay.
it's in the blurb,
Okay.
that this young girl is her mother at her age.
Oh,
So she learns a great deal about the family during this summer. She learns what's important to her, what she really wants to do
yeah.
musically,
Yeah.
and what she may not want to do musically.
Mm.
And she there's a lot of healing in her family in this book. It's so beautifully written. I loved it. I highly recommend it. The
Yes.
Color of Sound by
I've
Emily
seen
Barth.
I've seen the cover all over and people recommending it, but I think I need to up it on my to be read for something sooner. It sounds fantastic. Well, and thank you so much for sharing that with us, Laura, and all about your Summer of Luck. Do you know when your newest one will be released? Have you finished? You said you've
Well,
worked,
they're all out. The
or I
Chamber of
mean
Novels.
your newest contemporary,
Oh,
your book four,
I
when that will be
wish.
released. Okay. But we know there is stuff in the works coming from Laura Stegman, so watch for what's
Yes.
coming
Yes.
because
And by the way, my three print books, they're also out in audiobook. They just
yes.
came out in October, the last one did. So
And I actually thoroughly enjoyed it. So I had the copy, but I've just had so many others that I've been trying to read, and so I plugged in to Audible, and it is well done. I can't remember her first name, but Lindsay Dorcas.
Lindsay Dorcas,
Dorcas
yes,
did
the
an
wonderful
excellent job.
narrator.
I thought she did a good job with the different voices, and I enjoyed it. Audio is such a wonderful way to immerse yourself and connect and get through a book, and I feel like nothing is lost in an experience with audio. Some people are like, well, that's not really reading, but we're still internalizing language and a story. And yes, definitely, if you don't have time to sit down and read the printed page, check out this on audio.
And some kids struggle with being able to actually read
Yes,
books. So being able to listen is magical for them.
absolutely. Absolutely.
Thank you so much. This has been just a delightful conversation.
Thank you, Laura.